Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. Before we get started, here's a quick note from our sponsor. Altura Associates is a mid-sized, mission-driven firm delivering impact and performance across the built environment in North America, and they're looking for the best in the industry to join their team. From designing and implementing corporate sustainability programs, to manipulating systems in the field to achieve optimized performance, to building the tools that support those project teams, Altura is committed to solving our world's macro-level problems through tangible projects today. If you're interested in working alongside passionate colleagues to make a lasting impact, reach out at careers@alturaassociates.com. That's careers@alturaassociates.com. This episode is a conversation with Grigor Hadjiev, Head of Development, ESG, and Innovation at Allianz Real Estate in Paris, France. We talked about why technology increases the value of Allianz's portfolio of hundreds of assets. We talked about the where, what, how, and when of Allianz's smart buildings program, including the vital independent data layer, or building operating system, as Grigor's team calls it. Before we dive in, I want to remind everyone to start budgeting for the next cohort of our Foundations course. We use this course to help people across the world level up their impact in smart buildings, and you can find more info at nexuslabs.online/foundations. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the Nexus Podcast with Grigor Hadjiev. Hello, Grigor. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you, James.
Can you start by introducing yourself and providing a little background?
With pleasure. So I'm in charge of the design and execution of large CapEx programs in our West European region at Allianz Real Estate. And I'm also leading the global innovation digitalization activities, bringing basically data asset management into the firm's expertise. And prior to joining Allianz Real Estate in 2018, I was leading the French-speaking Switzerland office of a large real estate consulting and project management company.
All right. And what's your background? Is it IT, technology?
So I have a degree in architecture, then a little bit more specialized in engineering, building topics. And then I did a business degree. So I worked a little bit also in the finance industry. So I'm a little bit between the two worlds.
All right. And you're in France? Are you in Paris? Where are you at?
I'm based in Paris, and I'm covering out of Paris for a couple of topics, the West Europe region, and for other topics, it's a global function. Yeah, out of Paris.
Got it. Cool. So tell us about Allianz. Number of buildings, types of buildings, where are they? Sounds like Western Europe, maybe Eastern Europe as well. And then what's the sort of real estate investment approach? How long do you guys hold buildings, or is it more transactional? Can you just take us through an overview of the portfolio?
Yeah. So Allianz Real Estate is managing over 91 billion of assets under management. To give a number of buildings, this is difficult, but in Europe, for example, we have, roughly speaking, between 450 to 500 assets. In terms of asset classes, we are covering offices, retail, logistics, but also residential, and a little bit of hospitality, mixed use, and student housing. Our offices are close to our assets. That means predominantly in Europe, but also in Asia Pacific, like in Singapore, in Japan, in China. And so we have also offices across the United States, where we cover the local markets in those asset classes.
Got it. Very cool. So let's talk about, you mentioned digitization, and that's kind of part of your role. We're going to talk about smart building technology, obviously. Can you just talk broadly about how those two types of technology initiatives improve asset value? So how does Allianz, the real estate company, look at technology to sort of make the buildings worth more?
So first of all, I need to mention that we are a long-term investor. You asked me that in the previous question. That means that we hold the buildings for 10 years and more. And we need to manage our clients' buildings in the best way during this period and keep them attractive because we will either sell or hold them for another period after this already pretty long period. So innovation and technology has to support asset management decisions to ensure continued portfolio attractiveness and resilience. And therefore, we use technology innovation to improve this operational efficiency that we will speak a little bit later in details. This is also a lever for us to lower the running cost of the buildings and to optimize the energy performance. Those two pillars are fundamentally important, and we believe that they are generating today's or help us to keep the value of our assets. At the same time, alongside this optimized ESG performance, we are deploying technology to create better workplace that is leading to higher productivity, especially in office buildings for our tenants. And this is increasing, we believe, the attractiveness to tenants who prefer to work in assets that are green and productive rather than one that are a little bit less capable. And in best case, we think that through technology, we can eventually get tenants that are willing to pay more for this high-performing products. But even if they're not paying more, our assets stay less on the market empty, which is already improving the ERVs and therefore the operating income. And I will not referring to all the studies on the market that are demonstrating that assets that are green are showing better results, higher rents than assets that are not green. We can't observe exactly in all the portfolio this trend, but we can definitely say that we see this kind of indications on the market. Yes.
Got it. And how do you think about smart building technology? Is that different than the digitization effort or digitalization effort? The way I think about it is like there are certain technologies that are helping us run the building better, but then there are certain technologies that are helping just run the real estate business better. And those might be mutually exclusive, or they might be a similar, you might check both boxes with one technology. Do you think about those two efforts as separate, or are they one initiative?
So we handle differently internally the corporate innovation and let's say the smart buildings. On the corporate innovation digitalization side, we have the introduction of a lot of tools for Allianz Real Estate, for example, place to underwrite, to do the business plans, or software to manage the portfolio on the larger scale. But it's more on financial and let's say high level and precise data, versus on the building side, we tried to stay closer to what is happening on the technology and to make sure that with the building technology, we can at the same time increase the energy performance, the user experience. So we believe that the user topics are a little bit, the building topics are a little bit closer to the assets, into the operations, versus our own business. We have started already a couple of years ago to put the same solutions in place, for example, SAP for the accounting globally. So I can say that we first baselined and worked on our corporate solutions, and then we started working on the buildings, where having one size fits all is a little bit more difficult than on the corporate size. Even if technology is helping to baseline and to put similar standards across buildings across different geographies.
Yep, makes sense. So you mentioned all the different types of assets you guys have under management. When you talk about like the user or the occupant experience, like you talked about with office buildings, like where the office building industry is going, do you have something similar? You mentioned dormitories, multifamily, industrial. Is there something similar for those other verticals that, kind of speaks to the importance of technology in engaging whatever end user that is? So if I'm a dormitory, it's a university student, that kind of thing. Are there similar reasons for technology in those other types of buildings?
Yes, so our focus predominantly with our smart building program is definitely on office buildings. One of the reasons is that we operate them directly. To answer your quick question, I think that across all asset classes, we use similar technology, but the use cases are very different. If the problematic in an office building is in residential is how to optimize the energy performance, even if you use similar technologies, ultimately the way that we use that is different. We don't do the same in student housing as we do in offices, even if from a technical perspective, the technical solutions or the digital solutions are similar, because I can control and I can manage closely in office building the heating and the cooling. But when it comes to private areas, for example, in an apartment, sometimes not sometimes, but this is generally within the responsibility of the person of the occupiers that lives in this apartment, and sometimes he has like this different needs than the one that we can see for office buildings. And so focus on office buildings because we operate them, but on the other asset classes, we systematically work with specialized operators. You have mentioned student housing and the dormitories, or the student housing, and also shopping centers. We work with partners and we observe that they use similar technologies than the one that we're using, but just for different use cases and in a different manner.
I see. Okay. I think that sets the context for us. Now let's sort of start diving into your guys' smart buildings program. So I think a good place to start would be to say, just how do you define smart buildings? I feel like it's where a lot of people start and everybody has their own definition, but I thought it'd be good to just hear from your, so we just kind of set the stage for what do you mean by smart building?
I know that I've been recorded of giving 10 different explanations across conferences of what is a smart building, so this will be the 11th one. I really think that a smart building is simply a good building, which means that through technology and through exchange of data across various technical installations, the performance of the building is really optimized, the comfort is optimized, and this is happening in an obstacle-free and seamless way for the end user. And this is when we focus specifically on the technological side. But technology is just an enhancer, and if you have a bad fundamentals of the buildings, bad architecture, bad design, bad materials, you can have the smartest building, but if the fundamentals are bad, you just have a bad building that is smart. So we cannot completely dissociate the smartness from the other intrinsic qualities of the building, but I would have qualified that as this kind of data layer that comes and that makes the technical installations communicate to each other, and that is just improving the way that the people are using the building and that the building is operated.
Got it. All right, let's dive into that. So you guys have this team and program and sort of long-term plan, I would assume, for rolling out technology in your buildings. Can you just do an overview of how many people are on your team? What's your approach? What's the status of the implementation, pilot stage, rollout stage, and then sort of what's the roadmap for the next few years?
So our smart building program, we call it internally, as per today, the building signature program. And this is a set of solutions, set of technologies that we have combined from the market that help us to reach these use cases that we're speaking until now. So improved user experience, better comfort for the tenants, but also optimized energy performance, and so on. So we have selected globally a set of technologies and digital solutions that we have tested locally in across the different regions worldwide. And we found the denominator, so the solutions that are bringing value systematically in all locations. So we combined these digital solutions and technical equipments into one set, we bundled them in one place. And we are aiming to cover, roughly speaking, 20% of the net asset value of our portfolio by this program. So that means that our buildings, whenever this is applicable, they will have an energy management solution, they will have user experience applications, user experience solutions. And what is very important is that on those buildings, we will collect a big amount of data in order to optimize the operations. And this data will also to help us to support the local the users, the tenants, in their everyday business. For example, we are supporting them with the return to office. We are supporting them to improve the comfort in the building by adjusting, for example, the temperature. We are supporting them to provide this obstacle-free experience with entering into the office with my phone. With my phone, I can then book a room. I can also order food. So this kind of little services that are in the interface between what the tenant can do and what the landlord can provide. So we have combined this set of solutions. We're deploying it currently. In Europe, we have delivered already 15 big assets, and we have another 30 assets across the planet that are within this process of smart upgrade. And here I would like to mention that our building signature program has two big fundamental pieces. One is the deployment of existing buildings within the portfolio. This is a difficult piece because we are adding costs, but the tenants are there. And we need to work with them and to add a kind of a subset of our technological solutions to the buildings to cover a subset of the challenges that we have identified. And on the other hand, we have a very strict long policy on how to refurbish buildings whenever we have large capex programs. And then we are coming with hundreds of pages of recommendations and the guiding principles and the design principles to make sure that everything that we know, the best of our knowledge, is deployed and will be deployed by our network of partners, mainly across Europe. So we have upgrade of existing buildings, light upgrades, and then we have this kind of holistic, agnostic, deep, profound smartization that we deploy whenever we have a large capex programs across the portfolio.
Makes sense. On those existing buildings that are occupied, they're not undergoing a huge, capex redevelopment. How do you work through the business case with adding ongoing costs to those buildings and those tenants? How does that work out?
Yeah, so it's a fair point. I think my executive board could have asked exactly the same one, and they're doing it nonstop, by the way. So in a nutshell, when we have existing buildings, the main challenge that we are currently facing, that our existing buildings are facing, is energy optimization. For that, you basically need to add an artificial intelligence energy management solution if you want to take the low-hanging fruit through technology. And to do an active energy management, you need basically to put a couple of devices in the building, like people counting, like temperature meters, comfort meters, in order to make sure that when you decrease the temperature in the building, you still have a kind of acceptable comfort level from the tenants. And also, if you want to cut the lighting, you need to make sure that no one is in the building. So this occupancy adjusted energy management in the building comes with a kind of set of devices. And the second big trigger for existing buildings is cybersecurity. We need to make sure where the data is flowing, how the data flows, where the data goes, who has access to the data. And we need to make sure that there are some kind of basic stuff that are done in the building. And the third aspect around that is, but this is really discussed with the tenants, do they want to have some kind of technologies that are improving the comfort? For example, as we already track their air quality in order to optimize the energy performance, sometimes when we discuss with them, they're saying, but because we have already this kind of occupancy information, I want to use that in order to switch to flex desk, or because I'm switching to flex desk, can you please add also this kind of tenant app controlled access control? So this kind of discussions, they're really case by case based, but the two fundamentals are ESG improvements and cybersecurity. And they are driving the set of technologies that we need to deploy on the existing buildings. The costs are pretty low. So we speak about something between 5 and 12 euros per square meter additional fees, additional costs. And this is then leading to, on average, 20% of energy savings and a lot of data that the tenant can use in his everyday business. As I mentioned already, like the return to office or to track tenants, how his own area is occupied. Are the people using the same floors on the building? Why they don't go to certain areas? How is the food and beverage offer, for example, used within the building? So we're able to provide some analytics only based on the data that on the devices that we need to put to do our two main topics, energy optimization and cybersecurity. So we add these devices for energy performance and cybersecurity, eventually for some comfort elements. But then we use the data, and this is what it becomes interesting. We use the data generated from those devices to add additional services and insights for example, the office manager or for the real estate team of our tenants. And this kind of insights are valuable for them to do the adjustments of cleaning, of the number of desks and others.
Got it. Let's circle back. I want a couple questions before we dive into some of the details around the actual infrastructure with how you enable all of this. One is, I think people will be surprised when they listen to this and they hear you say, we have several hundred assets, but then your smart buildings program is only really going to be applied to, I think you said 20% of them. Can you walk through like what makes a building qualify for this program?
Probably I didn't express it correctly. So we are targeting 20 billions of assets under management that needs to be upgraded. This basically covers almost the half of our directly managed assets. So I would have said that this is covering more every second suitable asset. So now what means suitable assets? A building to be qualified for our program, it needs to be obviously big and it needs to have some technical installations. There, for example, a central building management system, it needs to have a critical size. So we target buildings that are larger than 5,000 square meters. And why we do that? So if you take a very small residential asset in the city center of Paris with 15 apartments, the heating, the cooling, and most of the let's say the production and most of the services to the apartments are done locally within the apartment. So we can steer, for example, the cooling centrally because there is no central steering. We cannot steer the lighting except on the common areas, but this is minor. Versus in an office building where we have, for example, a single tenant with which we work, it is much more easier to be impactful. So therefore, we take only big buildings. We do that predominantly on office assets, and I think that we will try to cover almost all buildings that are larger than 5,000 square meters and almost all office assets across Europe within the program.
Makes sense. So it seems like the first step in your sort of rolling out the program is to then analyze all of the buildings and say, where do we apply this and where do we not? Where does it make sense and where does it not make sense?
Exactly. This is exactly what we did. What we did, for example, with the let's say 450 European physical assets in Europe. So we screened them, and we, for example, for some of them, realized that there is just not a building management system even if the building is big, because it's an older building. And such building will go into a refurbishment process in 2 years' time. So typically, such a building is, as per today, out of the program because we know that we will refurbish it in 2 years' time. And as we discussed a couple of minutes ago, when we do refurbishment, we do the full set. We deploy the full set. But as this process will start in 2 years' time, we just keep these buildings that will undergo hardcore refurbishment. We keep that. I'm saying that it's out of the program, but in fact, we can say that the program is a 5, 6, 10 years program, and that the entire portfolio will sooner or later go through this process. But currently, we're targeting for the next 3 years to go with this 20 billion of assets under management.
Got it. Okay, 2 last questions on the program. First is you have some super fans on your team. Can you just talk Nexus super fans, some listeners of the podcast? So we want to do a shout out to them, but also can you just talk about the team that you have that's kind of required to implement this sort of program across that many assets?
So I think that I'm working with exceptional colleagues. First, I will say a word about our strong presence locally. So we have in each location where we have a big concentration of assets, we have a local last management team. So we work very closely with them, and they're the one on the ground that is executing the smart building strategy and the policy. At the same time, I'm extremely happy because I think I really work with the best people worldwide in terms of smart innovation, digitalization. So we have a very small team of couple of people, 4 or 5 people. They're sitting here in Paris, and together with them, we define the global strategy. We support the global rollout by setting the tools, by providing, for example, the framework agreements, and by negotiating some costs centrally on the European scale. And we support our local last management colleagues with some methodology and with some manpower, especially to start this refurbishment projects or to start the retrofits. So central team that works on the strategy, central teams that pick up the right technologies, central team that is negotiating the large, let's say the big framework agreements, so that we can have the same kind of qualities across Europe, and central team that is consolidating the data. Once the upgrade is done, the data comes back to us. We structure, we analyze, and we work with this data in order to mirror it back to the asset management colleagues, which will then use it to take better decisions in the everyday.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to ask all these questions about the program is because I feel just, talking to your team and talking to you here, it feels very much like you are very well integrated into the organization. The organization from the top understands the value of technology and the value that each building can be, more valuable when technology is implemented in the right way. And then you guys have taken this very strategic approach and, done pilot projects and decided here are the use cases that we've, picked out as valuable to roll out. And then you said, here are the assets where this applies. And then you've taken it and you've built a team around the program to sort of say, these are the people that are required to really make this work internally long term. And I just think it's rare. It's becoming less rare, but it's rare that there's that strategic of an approach, especially, for asset managers that, it's not their core business to be smart buildings people, but having that, internal team, I feel like is really important.
You've completely explained the way that we are working. I need to stress out here that we have the full support from the executive committee, where I'm presenting, that is vetting the program. And then we have the buy-in from our local teams, because I think that they see the advantages. I'm not saying that everything is completely fluid and that there is nothing to be improved. It's just the opposite. So we're in the beginning. So we started 3 years ago, and we learned a lot over these 3 years. But I think that we are making huge progress by doing it. And I think it's completely important for such a strategic team like the central team on smart buildings also to work operationally on the projects, to go on the ground, not on all buildings, but to track and to follow a couple of examples, because we need to have this operational knowledge inside. Even if we do the pilots, we cannot roll it out on 160 buildings. I think this is what we are planning over the next 3 years. We can't cover with 4 people so many buildings, and it doesn't make sense to have only 3 people within an organization that understand from the topic. It's really interesting to get everyone onboarded, and everyone is adding something different from different backgrounds, from different perspective, from different country, and this is enriching constantly the program. So we have top down, but then we have bottom up, and it's constantly like a circle: top down, bottom up, top down, and it's not a real gymnastic, but I think there is a lot of positive vibes and interest across the functional and business lines to go further in that direction.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out the bottom up piece of it as well, because it is just kind of sitting in that sandwich of managing up and managing down for a team like yours, and yeah, that's super interesting. So let's real quick, one aside before we deep dive into the technology a little bit more. Can you talk about, for the people that aren't in Europe and aren't necessarily as familiar with the European market, can you talk about the importance of ESG and the importance of regulations as well when it comes to carbon and sustainability?
So your question is out of Europe or specifically for Europe? I just missed the first part.
Specifically for Europe. This audience is 60%. North American, probably. Mm-hmm. So there's a good amount of people that are going to be listening to this that are not as familiar with what's going on in Europe from a sustainability and from a decarbonization standpoint.
Got it. So I would mention a couple of elements that I will combine them into a summary. So Europe is very driven by regulations. So the US is a little bit more deregulated market, as well as Asia. So Europe is very driven by regulations, and I'll give an example from France. So in France, we are supposed to respect European regulation, for example, the European taxonomy, that is giving like a kind of direction of what should be the performance of a building in the future as part of this investment taxonomy alignment. And at the same time, we have in France what we call décret tertiaire. So this is a French-specific regulation that is extremely specific about what should be the energy performance of a building tomorrow. And for example, the French décret tertiaire is saying that a building's energy consumption in 2030 should be less than 40% compared to a year before 2018. So we have something that is extremely tangible. We need to optimize the energy performance of a building by 20% in 10 years. Then we have specific other regulations that are coming from Allianz. For example, Allianz is committed to net zero. That means that all our assets are supposed to be carbon neutral by 2050, according to the CRREM methodology. And this is just adding different one piece, another piece, another piece. So this is just different regulations that are going into the direction of energy optimization. And at a certain point, the people, the tenants are there also looking for greener buildings. So we have on one side the market. The market is looking for better products, and on the other hand, we have cumulative regulations on each other. This is very European. And then when you add all the ingredients, and when you put all the things into one place, you see that one way of doing it is just to refurbish the building, plan A. Or plan B is you need to, through technology, to somehow optimize the operation of the assets, obviously by working together with the tenants. So we realized that there is no way in between in terms of ESG performance. So or you need to go to hardcore, or you need to use technology and to work a lot with the tenants in order to improve with a big impact. So Allianz, in that reason, and this is one of the reasons why I think that also we run the innovation program out of Paris, because in France we have a lot of restrictions that do not exist in other countries. So our life in France is more difficult than in other European countries, but the European life is more broadly more difficult than an Asian or US ESG life. At the same time, in US, for example, I see that the topics of the social aspects of the ESG are very important. Versus in Europe, we have a very strong let's say, focus on E, and not only on the proper energy aspects, but more broadly also, for example, on biodiversity, about circular economy and the materials that are used, about water, about waste. So this kind of topics are much more linked to the E, but at the same time, we're a little bit less focused on the S. So when we need to build a global strategy on innovation, on smart and on ESG, we definitely need to combine in our side. So I'm leading the innovation aspects, but I work also with my colleagues from the central ESG team. So we try to combine this kind of different expectations, and we try to find the common denominator, what is commonly true, what works in all geographies, and we are only learning from each other. But yes, Europe is a little bit more restrictive, and the expectations in Europe are tending to increase within the next years, which is already the case, but it's just getting tougher and tougher.
Got it. Let's pause here for one more quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll get back to the show. Now, I know many of you enjoyed the virtual Smart Buildings Exchange conference in August. The team behind that conference is the Smart Buildings Center Education Program, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that believes a smarter use of technology and practices in the built environment, particularly as they relate to building operations and management, will enable a cleaner, healthier, and more productive future. The Smart Buildings Center seeks to establish thought leadership for smart technologies and practices within the built environment and pursues its objective through the following pillars of activity. First, they deliver training programs to educate the building workforce of the future. Second, they enable industry-leading demonstration projects. And finally, they connect the industry through hosting and participating in events like the Smart Buildings Exchange Conference. So check out their body of work on the essential role of smarter buildings in the clean energy transition at the link in the show notes. And when you get in touch, tell them Nexus Labs sent you. And how big of a deal is decarbonization and specifically electrification of heating? If you look at a city like New York City, for example, if we go back to last week's podcast, the group talked about how they have local law 97, and it just continues to ratchet up the expected performance and the regulated performance of each building to the point where if you burn natural gas, you start to go out of compliance, even if you have a really efficient building. How big of a deal is that? I know that in France, it's a heavy nuclear country, right? So you're already electrified for the most part, or the electricity grid is clean. Whereas if you go Eastern Europe, it seems like there's a heavy natural gas component, and a lot of systems are probably burning fossil fuels today. So how do you guys think about that? And is that a separate team within Allianz that's sort of focused on that piece?
So in terms of organization, we are hybridly organized. So we have a strategy, and then we have execution. The execution of ESG in my region is also with me. It's with an additional team, but it belongs to the same community. So I can answer this question. Your first point was, what is how do we compare energy performance across countries and geographies? This is first fundamental point, and here we are using the CREM methodology, and the CREM methodology is taking into account for each specific country the energy mix in order to define what can be the decarbonization curve for each specific country and for each specific asset class. This helps us to eliminate this kind of subjective thinking about how to convert what, when, in which units, and what is good, what is bad. And the CREM methodology is bringing basically two main KPIs up front. One is the carbon footprint. This is what everyone is mentioning. But the second one is the kilowatt hour. So this is the energy intensity, the kilowatt hour per square meter per year. And in your example about am I green if I use gas? And even if my building is very efficient, but it uses gas, probably it's not very efficient in terms of carbon. And this is one of the interests of the CREM methodology, because you will have the two indicators. Is your building intrinsically, let's say, efficient and optimized? And then if you have a low energy consumption, which is the same across the same, let's say, we expect to have across the same latitude and geographical position in the world, pretty similar energy consumptions. But if you go to the north or to the south, you expect to have some variation. For example, the Nordic countries, they're overheating, they're heating a little bit more in the winter time, and the south countries, they're cooling more in the winter. So based on the geographical setup, you have different patterns in terms of energy consumption. And then the second question is, how do we qualify energies as a green? And you mentioned the natural gas one. I will not go into commenting the decisions of CREM. Is nuclear green? Is green? Is the natural gas green? But even if we like it or we don't like it, there is for the first time a kind of reference model that is saying, okay, this is good, this is not good. And then everyone is free to get the data and to go into the details and to see, okay, I have a very good, very optimized building, but that is in terms of energy intensity, but still in terms of CO2 intensity, I'm very high. So do I need to put a lot of capex in the building? No, because even if you put a lot of capex in a building that is intrinsically optimized, this will not change almost anything. You'll just spend a lot of money because the building is already consuming a less energy. So in order to improve the carbon footprint, you need to look differently to the topic. And this is the point where I think that the overall global knowledge needs to move forward, because you pointed out things that we are also thinking about, and for which I cannot give a black or white answer, but just think that we need to look at the two KPIs: intrinsic energy qualities of the building, so through the kilowatt hour per square meter per year, and through the CO2 emissions tons per year, to make sure that we can really understand what is triggering a bad performance. Is it the intrinsic, or it's just the type of energy that is used, or the source, or how greener is the source?
Got it. Great answer. I love that. So let's talk about the technology. I know you guys, when I talked to your team, they talked a lot about, we probably talked for an hour about the concept of an independent data layer, and you guys call it, I think, building operating system. So can you just talk about, and I think you were already talking about it a little bit before, when you talk about having occupancy counting, occupancy data, using that for energy optimization, but then having that data available to be used for other use cases like space planning and whatever else you want to use it for. So can you just talk about that sort of data infrastructure and the importance of having that layer figured out, and how you guys have sort of gone about building that layer out in your program?
So I will probably not satisfy with my answer the geek community, because I'm best representative of the geek community, but I'll explain it with my own words. So historically, the building generates a lot of data, but this data goes into all directions. And sometimes in the same building, we have seen in the buildings from 10 years old, a couple of devices that are measuring exactly the same occupancy. And I was wondering, why do we have like several devices that are measuring exactly the same thing? And the answer is because they are coming with specific technical equipments, and the equipment wants to measure himself the thing alone. And I said, interesting point, but so I need to maintain a couple of devices just to have the same wrong information because they are systematically something is wrong with them. So our logic with the data layer, or what we call internally the building operating system, is simply to make sure that the different technical equipments are able to exchange in the same language. One, and B, that if I need an information, there is a unique source of truth for this information within the building. So if I need the occupancy, I will measure the occupancy once, and then this data will be shared with other, let's say, technical equipments within the building or technical installations, or let's say whoever needs this data. But I know what is the source of truth of this data. And then the use cases are multiple. Historically, the use cases of the occupancy were all only I needed to know if there is on off for the lighting, so no people, no lights, people light. But today we know that there are plenty of other use cases. And we started defining the use cases, and we just realized that for us, as you mentioned, we can list a lot of use cases, but over time we're just adding new use cases. So the denominator for all these use cases is data. And what we call the building operating system is just this data layer where all the data is kind of structured. This is very important. So the data is structured, it's stored, and we can manage the accesses to this data to different equipments, to different stakeholders like the facility manager, asset manager, and other people that really need to know that for whatever the reason that it is. So central place where the data is stored, where the data is analyzed, and where we can manage this kind of accesses.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier it's kind of like the materials in a building, and the way that I think about it is like it's kind of like the infrastructure to a building. It's like you wouldn't buy a building without plumbing, for example, or you wouldn't buy a building without internet or the electrical infrastructure. And so the data infrastructure, it seems like you're starting to think about that in the same way as any other type of infrastructure or any other type of finishing in the lobby or things like that increase the asset value. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
Yes, in the sole purpose of adding a value somewhere, which means energy efficiency, user experience, cybersecurity, or for us to get this kind of analytics so that we can take better decisions. We believe that the infrastructure is part of the overall technical, let's say, logic of the building. So we cannot dissociate the data flow from how the building is operated. So this is part of it's one component of the building, like the HVAC is one component, the networks is another one, the place where the data is gathered and redistributed across other equipments is another one. So this is a little bit the way that we see that, because if you don't work specifically on that, on this integration from equipments across the building into one system, we cannot perform the other tasks and use cases. So yes, we need to see it as a separate asset within the building.
And after talking to your team, I learned that you guys kind of think about it in an interesting way. You think about this infrastructure, this data layer, as kind of something that needs to be local to the building, that lives as an asset locally, that if the building turns over in a transaction, that asset goes with it to the new owner of that building. I know you guys like to typically hold buildings for a long time, but the way that you're thinking about it is like this asset lives as a piece of infrastructure with the building. Is that kind of how the business of Allianz kind of thinks about it?
So first, we're in the beginning of this process. Yes, our conviction as per today is that we want the building to be a little bit independent and to be run in an independent way from the entire global network. Because we see on the market, and I will not surprise anyone, we know that a country can cut the access for some solution to another country, and we don't want to be a kind of victim somewhere, that our buildings are victimized somewhere. So first, the building needs to be operated, so we need to make sure that all our buildings can be operated locally, first of all. Then, is the building operating system on-premise or on the cloud? I think this is the second question. But in all cases, we need to make sure that the building can run and can be managed locally in a completely independent way from the network. This is our conviction from a pure resilience topic. And then the topic of on-premise on cloud, I think that if it's built in a similar way, we can always mirror the information on a cloud if there is any interest to do that. Or we can always try to have also the cloud solution to steer and to achieve scalability for several buildings on a BOS cloud solution, let's put it in this way. But to be honest, today, I'm a little bit skeptical and I will go for a low-tech solution. So manage all buildings remotely from a central BOS that is managing 60 buildings centrally. Why not? But I don't think that we will be the first one doing that, even if we already have 2 examples that we have delivered in this way. But it's not our strategy to be so dependent on cloud solutions. We really want to make sure that the building can be operated locally.
Yeah, very cool. So when I think about the building operating system or the independent data layer, I think about it as, a horizontal layer that then applications can sit on top of, right? So you mentioned, I think your words were AI active energy management. So that's maybe one app that sits on top of the building operating system, basically controlling systems better than they would be controlled if not for that application. What are the other applications? You mentioned tenant or occupant experience application. Are there any others that you're looking at as being an important piece of the stack that sort of sits on top of the BOS?
So currently, you're mentioning the one that is probably the most critical one. So in the sphere of the energy management, we have also managed an energy monitoring one. So we're working with DeepKey, it's not a secret, that is gathering the portfolio information, the energy consumption from the portfolio on the European level. And then we have also facility management enhancement solutions like TwinOps that is used for the facility manager in a 3D. They're using 3D model and the real-time data in order to optimize the way that they operate the building, they replace spare parts and so on. And we also, on top of the building operating system layer, we have our own data asset management platform where we extract the meaningful data for us for our own use cases. But you are right that the BOS is endless number of solutions. So I think that we're really at the beginning, and we see that our tenants, they're deploying their own solutions on top of the BOS that are linked to the way that they are living their assets. So, for example, a meeting room booking solution that is then integrating with the BOS, and whenever you book the room is pre-ventilated and so on. So I think that the importance here is really BOS. I don't think that we are there yet with all possible applications that you can build on top of that. I think that in the next year, this is a very big market, and if someone wants to invest somewhere, I definitely recommend to go and to look what can you put on the BOS in order to create value, because for us it's just simpler to work with such applications that come on top of the BOS, because we can control the information they are accessing. We know that, for example, the energy management partner is accessing the information from the smart meters, from the occupancy, from the comfort, and we know exactly what he's using and the way that he's using that. In the previous time without BOS, they just access to something. We don't know to what. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what kind of command they're also giving to the HVAC. And this kind of intransparency is limiting the number of use cases. And by adding this data layer, we're just increasing tremendously, dramatically the transparency. And starting from now, we can think. I think we're really in the beginning of thinking what else can be added on top of that. Obviously, the kind of gateway solutions and cybersecurity aspects that are cybersecurity solutions that are helping us to monitor better the networks is also something that goes easily on top of the BOS versus individually to try to secure plenty of networks. So just a couple of examples,
Yeah, and I think the reason why your team listened to the podcast is the same reason that listening to you is like music to my ears, because we're in such alignment with how the stack should be built up, and how smart buildings, quote unquote, should be done. And it's that horizontal approach, network layer, data layer, application layer on top. It's just the only way to then enable multiple applications. And like you said, you didn't know that your tenants were going to build these different applications on top, right? You just wanted to their building to be ready so that the tenant can do what they want with their data. And I think that's the piece that we as an industry haven't quite grasped yet. And it's the reason why I spent most of this year talking about it. So if I look back on 2022, that's the main thing that I've been sort of just pounding over and over and over again. And I love to see organizations like yours say, you know what, this is the way that we're going to do it. And you're doing it independently from me, right? It's like you guys have come up with this on your own. And it's good to see people sort of mirroring the same approach as a best practice, which is awesome. So what are the next steps in the program? It sounds like scaling up is a big priority, applying it to existing buildings, applying it to, like you said, capital projects, redevelopments. What's your sort of roadmap?
So one of our challenges is acceleration of the deployment of the installation of the devices and across the assets. There is a lack of partners, lack of competent people on the market. There is no industry for that, to be honest. So I'm going back to what I said. So it's not that they're not competent people, but the offering is not structured. When it's structured, it's completely structured differently from one country to another one. And this is hindering us as a global player because in one country we go to the telecommunication operator to ask them to deploy devices. In another country we go to a construction company. In another country we go to the facility manager. In another country we go to the manufacturer of the HVAC. And it's so disparate. So there is no denominator for that. So one of our challenges is to make sure that we can deploy the IoT devices and set of technologies in a fast way across our geographies. For that, we're looking for partners. And the second big challenge that we have is on the large refurbishments where we put 100% of our knowledge. We need to systematize more the role of the master system integrator. That it's not a known, very well-known role. A lot of different design engineering companies, they think that they can do it without really being able to do that. So we are becoming very, very sophisticated in our requirements for the master system integrator, because whenever we don't have a master system integrator, we just need to restart until ultimately we get one. So I think the next steps for us is to deploy on the bigger scale, on the larger scale, to continue the deployment that we have already started, and to start working with the data that we are gathering, because we start having a very valuable data across Europe. And so we would like to build a data asset management function, which means that we need to analyze in a deeper way some trends and some tendencies across our portfolio. For example, is it true that the people in big cities are more likely back to the office? And is it true that the offices in mid-sized cities are not so full? So this kind of trends, we start to having a kind of insights, and this is very important for us to build up further these competencies, as well as next steps, I will say, the deployment of the cybersecurity piece within the smart building program, which is a completely new piece that we have deployed only on a couple of assets. But there as well, we need to build up competences internally, and we need to bring our partners as well on the right level of competence, because I think that today we're teaching sometimes people that were supposed to be experts in that. Those companies are telling us, yeah, but we never asked us something like that. So I think it's a partner in a partnership modus. This is how we move forward. And I just expect in the future that on one hand, my teams continue to be as motivated and passionate as they are today about the topic, not to count working hours. And then that we continue to work with good partners on the market, because this is how we learn. We do not produce any software internally. We do not produce any technology internally. Our role internally is to combine them and to make sure that when we deploy, this is creating value, because ultimately our role, and I need to repeat that, Allianz Real Estate, we're an investment and asset manager. So we need to make sure that we increase the portfolio value. And this is what we try to do through technology and all the things that we have discussed today. And therefore, we do not invent anything new. We just put things together.
Totally. Well, that's a great place to end off. I think those are great directions to head. Well done putting together this program. Well done putting the pieces together, including all the people on your team. Let's end with some Careveouts. So are there any books or podcasts or documentaries or anything else that sort of has had a major impact on you lately?
I'll surprise you, but I'm watching kind of documentaries for my 5-year-old son on complex topics. and I'm watching them and I say, oh my gosh, they're explaining such a complex topic in such simple way. So I will further tell you the name of the series. They're in French, but my learning from that is that a lot of people spend a lot of time to simplify very complex topics. And I think that this is one of the challenges that we have in the field of smart and building technology, is that we need to find a way to explain that with simple words to people that are supposed to use it, but that are not supposed to do it. And this is where I want to end. So I wish that I will be able one day to do this kind of documentary on smart buildings for my son. And sometimes when I need to speak with people, I'm thinking, how can I oversimplify exactly as I need to explain to my son what I'm doing in the office? And it's very difficult. I'm not there at all. But I hope that I will be able to go to that.
I'm with you on that. I feel like it's the challenge that I have in the position that I'm in, which is continue to push the envelope and get to the edge with the, like you said, the nerds of the industry. I always say that I'm a proud nerd and I love our community of nerds, but we need to push the edge of the envelope there while at the same time simplifying it to bring more people into the community of nerds. Right. Yeah. And that's the balance that I feel like we're always trying to struggle with Nexus. And I find it to be very fun because I'm not the utmost expert in any topic. And so I'm kind of following along with the nerds to get to the edge. And then I view myself as like, I got to bring the people that aren't in the circle along with, try to get them up to where I'm at, following along with the nerds. So I'm with you in that. I think it's super important, and it's how we sort of create change, I think. Thank you, Grigor, for coming on the show. Thanks for doing what you do.
James, the pleasure was mine.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.